face value tickets to the Eras Tour. Maybe you kept 3 or 4 tickets, you went with your best friends, and maybe you sold the others and covered the cost of not only those tickets, but some merch for yourself. And if you're a season ticket holder to an MLS team, you could sell those seats for when Messi came to town and essentially recoup the cost of an entire season. So selling these super high value tickets just became very attractive and often too good a prospect to pass up for some fans this year.
And so this new tax law we're talking about is specifically targeting people who sold these tickets.
So what we're seeing now is the reporting threshold lowered for ticketing companies to flag to the IRS when any user's transactions hit $600. So before, the reporting threshold was $20,000, so that was really only affecting professional ticket brokers when it comes to ticket sales. So these are people who have made an entire business from buying and reselling tickets for a markup. So there's been that relationship with the IRS and these platforms of sort of communicating and reporting to the IRS that income on a professional level. Again, these are people who run entire businesses on this. But what's new now is that sort of like your average Joe seller who's maybe only reselling a couple of tickets a year, maybe just one ticket a year, and it's a really high value one, is more likely to meet the new threshold. And a ticketing company then needs to report that to the IRS. To be clear, if you sold a ticket and profited any amount in the past, that technically always has been considered taxable income that you're supposed to report to the IRS. But what we're seeing now with these changes is that it's going to be a lot harder to kind of skate through with those. The IRS wants to capture that income and that revenue.
And so what's the reason for the change?
As part of the coronavirus relief package in early 2021, the Democrats passed something called the American Rescue Plan Act, and that lowered the threshold on these essentially digital transactions that we're seeing. And so the idea is to capture more money and have more Americans paying more taxes on all types of income that come from digital transactions.
So it's not just concert or sporting tickets that are affected, right? Who else could be impacted?
Right, it's a lot broader than that. Payment processors like Venmo and the sort of gig economy platforms like eBay, Etsy, Rover are also affected. We'll see folks who resell vintage clothing and walk dogs and things like that all affected by this as well.
And so I know we were talking earlier about people who sold their tickets for way more than they initially bought them for. What about for people who sell their tickets for less than they paid for it? Is this sort of thing being flagged as well?
Anytime that a transaction value or total transaction values add up to $600, that sort of triggers the 1099-K form needing to be sent out by these platforms. If you sold a ticket at a loss, in that case, there's no profit to pay tax on, but you'll still get a form. And on the flip side, the loss is not deductible, and resellers can't offset gains on some transactions with losses on others. So even if it's a loss, you may still have to report that on your tax return.
And I can imagine, with this threshold being lower, a lot more forms are going to have to get filled out. Is the IRS sort of preparing for this influx of people doing these transactions?
Absolutely. This law has already been pushed back a year once, but at this point the IRS is getting ready for this and having consumers prepare and having these platforms prepare to send out these forms and have the IRS receive them and have this be more reportable income.
So what does the IRS do with this information?
The IRS is now just going to have a lot more information on these sort of smaller transactions and smaller amounts of income that people are making, often in side hustles or just one-offs. So the IRS is going to have that information and they are going to want you to pay taxes on it.
I can imagine not everyone's on board with this. So what do critics of the new law say about it?
Opponents say this will be quite a burden for companies and platforms and also just confusing for consumers and taxpayers. Many critics think the threshold should be higher than $600. Currently, a bill in the Senate would set it at $10,000.
So given the average price of these tickets and the umbrella of transactions included in this law, we talked about online resellers, we talked about people selling clothes online, a lot of people could be affected by this. So what should people look out for so they don't miss anything come tax season?
People should look out for this 1099-K tax form. It's going to be the first time a lot of folks are getting this. So if they resold tickets or clothing or whatever, they should also keep record of everything. there's going to be some math to do, and I don't think this is going to make tax season any more fun for anyone.
That's Wall Street Journal music industry reporter Ann Steele. And that's it for your Money Briefing. Today's show was hosted and produced by me, Ariana Sprue, with supervising producer Melanie Roy. We'll be back tomorrow morning. Thanks for listening.
This episode is supported by FX's American Horror Stories. The Twisted Anthology series from Ryan Murphy returns. Each standalone episode contains a new nightmare delving into horror myths, legends, and lore. Don't miss FX's American Horror Stories 4-episode Halloween event streaming October 26th, only on Hulu. This episode was produced with audio effects in full surround sound. For the best experience, we kindly recommend you listen with headphones. Hi, listeners.
LaFonza Butler will make history today when Vice President Kamala Harris swears her in as California's newest U.S. Senator.
Yeah, Butler will become the first black lesbian to openly serve in the Senate. She will serve out the remainder of a Senate term left vacant by the death of Dianne Feinstein, who represented California for 3 decades.
For more on this, we turn to Scott Schaefer from member station KQED in San Francisco. Scott, so why did California Governor Gavin Newsom choose LaFonza Butler for that vacancy?
Well, I think she has a lot of qualities that Newsom likes, including the fact that her appointment is historic. As we heard in the introduction there, she'll be the first lesbian of color to serve in the Senate. Newsom likes that. She's also relatively young, 44. And he's talked about her resume, you know, her personal experience growing up in a middle-class family in Mississippi. And she's also had a lot of work in her past on big issues that Democrats care about, like abortion. You know, she's head of Emily's List, where she's helped women who support abortion rights get elected. That's a big issue, of course, for Democrats. And, you know, as an open lesbian, she can very much relate to the attacks that the LGBTQ community are undergoing right now, and challenges to working people, all those things. And, you know, she's got really solid labor credentials, which is important to the Democrats. Basically, Newsom said that her experience just meets the moment, and this is how he summarized it yesterday.
I just think LaFonza Butler is uniquely positioned, simply the best person that I could find for this moment and this job.
And you know, a lot of people are saying, well, what are her priorities going to be? But, you know, she's coming into an institution where seniority is everything, and she's dead last in seniority. I don't think we'll hear any big policy pronouncements from her. But the big question really is, will she run for 6 years, or is she just going to fill out the rest of Dianne Feinstein's term? We don't know the answer to that yet.
Yeah, there are a number of California Democrats already vying for this Senate seat after Feinstein announced that she would not run for re-election. So how does Butler's appointment affect that race?
Well, it's got a real potential to shake things up. It really upsets the apple cart in a lot of ways. You know, Newsom said a couple weeks ago that he only wanted to appoint someone as an interim senator, not somebody who would run against the current field of Democrats, which includes, as you know, Adam Schiff, Katie Porter, and Barbara Lee, 3 pretty well-known Democratic members of Congress from out here. He got a lot of blowback for that, especially from black women who thought it was kind of insulting. You know, they wondered, why didn't he name, you know, Congresswoman Lee, who's already running for the Senate seat? She's the only black woman in the field. But Newsom says, you know, it's up to Butler now whether or not she wants to run. She hasn't said one way or the other. But I do think that the biggest impact is going to be on Barbara Lee. It's hard to see how this is going to help her.
Yeah, on Barbara Lee, there was a lot of pressure, as you mentioned, for Barbara Lee to get that Senate seat. Why do you think Gavin Newsom didn't choose her?
You know, word politics. You know, we know that former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi is a huge supporter of Adam Schiff. She's endorsed him for the Senate seat. And, you know, right now, Barbara Lee in the polls is running 3rd behind Schiff and Porter. She's had a hard time raising money. If he had appointed her, it might have helped her improve her chances a bit. Not something that Nancy Pelosi would have liked. You know, but she would have been running as an incumbent senator. That has its advantages. But, you know, the other thing is that Congresswoman Lee is 77 years old, and, you know, that might have worked against her, especially given all the controversy we've seen over the last month with Senator Feinstein's physical and mental decline.
That is Scott Schaefer from member station KQED. Scott, thank you.
You're welcome.
This is NPR News.
Good morning. It's 8:43. This is 91.7 WVXU. Coming up on the Marketplace Morning Report, we're going to hear a story talking about a federal appeals court temporarily blocking a contest from awarding grants to businesses that are majority owned by black women. It's one of a number of legal challenges being made against racial diversity efforts in the workplace. Also, the first of two trials against Sam Bankman-Fried, the founder and former CEO of the cryptocurrency exchange FTX, begins today in New York. Those stories in 10 minutes on the Marketplace Morning Report on 91.7 WVXU. Westbound 275 at 71 in Ohio, there's a wreck. It's on the right shoulder.
Follow 91.7 WVXU on Twitter and Facebook for the latest news and analysis from Cincinnati Public Radio and NPR.
Support comes from the Give Them 10 movement and Score the Neutered Cat, here to answer any question about cats by calling Score's Help Center at 1-833-GIVE-10. A cat specialist can give you advice on spaying and neutering, adoption, fostering, cat behaviors, and more. That's 1-833-GIVE-10. I'm Lucy May. Next Cincinnati edition, a panel of experts says a common ingredient in cold medicines doesn't work at all. Just as cold and flu season is approaching, we'll hear what a local doctor recommends instead. Then, with the saga of Sam Bankman-Fried, crypto has been in the headlines for all the wrong reasons. And some studies show more people are losing on crypto than making money. We'll talk about crypto literacy today at noon on Cincinnati edition on 91.7 WVXU.
The preservation of journalism is critically important. Including WVXU in your estate plans ensures reliable news and information will always be available in the Cincinnati community for generations to come. Ask your tax advisor about including WVXU in your will or trust. More information is available by calling 513-419-7116.
9 first morning weather, sunny and warm today, the high 86, clear and warm tonight, down to 62 and back to 86 tomorrow. 59 now in Cincinnati. If you're trying to figure out how you want to vote on the sale of the Cincinnati Railway, you can find all sorts of information to help guide your decision at WVXU.org. A very comprehensive story from Becca Costello with the pros, the cons, who's for it, who's against it. Take a look right now at WVXU.org.
Support for NPR comes from this station and from Jarl and Pamela Moe, focusing on civil liberties, foster youth, public radio, and the arts. From the Charles Stewart Mott Foundation, supporting efforts to promote a just, equitable, and sustainable society in its hometown of Flint and communities around the world. More at mott.org. And from the William T. Grant Foundation, supporting research to improve the lives of young people at WTGrantFDN.org.
This is Morning Edition from NPR News. I'm Layla Falden.
And I'm A. Martinez. Screens everywhere, all day long. I mean, you got one eye on the computer, one eye on your phone, another eye on the TV. Soon you realize you've run out of eyes and also time to keep up. Ever wonder what all of those screens are doing to your health? Manoush Zomorodi has. She's the host of NPR's TED Radio Hour and a new NPR series that's launching this week called Body Electric. It's an interactive investigation into the relationship between our technology and our bodies. And Manoush is here to tell us all about it. So we know that sitting is pretty bad for us, but apparently there's a lot more to it.
Well, there is and I've spent the last decade reporting on how tech is changing how we think and how we learn. But I don't know, over the pandemic, like a lot of people, I just felt so drained by all the screen time that I really wanted to understand how is all that tech changing us physically. And the statistics are kind of extraordinary. Since 1950, sedentary jobs have increased by nearly 85%. In the last 20 years, the rate of young people with type 2 diabetes has doubled. So we are in the midst of a slow-moving health crisis. But also, I mean, we just feel like crap on a daily basis. So here's what some listeners told us.
I find myself sitting, I find myself staring at screens. I'm not moving as much as I could or should.
I tend to just continuously lean further and further and further into the computer screen. You know, I'll be like, hey, I need a break. So stop looking at the big screen, and now it's time to look at the little screen. That's not good.
Okay, so our series gets into why we feel so bad.
But what are we going to do about it?
Well, that brings us to the interactive part of the series. So in their lab, Columbia researchers have found the minimum amount of movement we need so sitting on our butts all day doesn't kill us. Here's Keith Diaz, the head of the project.
To offset the harms of sitting, you should move every half hour for 5 minutes. Folks who moved every half hour for 5 minutes lowered their blood sugar spikes after eating by 60%.
Actually, I was a participant in that lab study. So one day I sat at a desk and worked for 8 hours straight without getting up. Then I went back a week later, and that day they had me get up every 25 minutes and stroll on a treadmill. And when I walked, my blood sugar was cut nearly in half, my blood pressure was down 5 points, and my mood was way better. And, it was super easy to do in the lab. But what we want to know is, can people do this in real life? So, NPR is partnering with Columbia University Medical Center to do a study to find out. And if you're listening right now, we would love you to join. The deadline to sign up is Sunday, October 8th at 11:59 p.m. Eastern Time. The Columbia folks are going to give you a certain dose of easy movement every day, and we'll ask you to report back.
So maybe we should just start right now, right?
Okay, let's do it.
Here we go.
Are you moving?
I am moving, I am up, I am bending and wiggling.
That's good.
Yeah, it's a little weird because normally I would never, ever do this. So, okay, so tell people where to go to find out more about this.
Go to npr.org/bodyelectric. You'll find our first episode and how to join the study.
Manoush Zomorodi, host of NPR's TED Radio Hour and the special series, Body Electric. We'll be checking in with her over the course of the series to hear how the study is going and how tech is changing our bodies. And Manoush, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
This is Morning Edition from NPR News. I'm E. Martinez.
And I'm Layla Fawley.
And I guess when I run back and forth from my office to the control room, that must count as exercise. I'm counting it, no matter what anybody says. Good morning. This is 91.7 WVXU. Coming up in 10 minutes, it's time for the BBC News Hour. Today, the UN Security Council's approved sending an international protection force to Haiti. Will it be able to break the grip of the armed gangs? Also, we'll look at the dangers posed by space debris after the U.S. government finds a satellite firm for littering in orbit. And we'll hear from the actress Helen Mirren about her latest role playing the Israeli Prime Minister Golda Meir. It's all coming up on the BBC News Hour at 9 o'clock.
Support comes from the Cincinnati Symphony Orchestra presenting Bernstein, Price, and Copeland October 13th and 14th at Music Hall. Experience the music of American composers representing a variety of perspectives from Florence Price's Symphony No. 1 to Bernstein's optimistic flair and Copeland's Lincoln Portrait with narrator George Takei. Tickets at CincinnatiSymphony.org. Season sponsor Western and Southern. I'm Lucy Neff. On the next Cincinnati edition, a panel of experts says a common ingredient in cold medicines doesn't work at all, just as cold and flu season is approaching. We'll hear what a local
haste. You can discover more or schedule an appointment at dubworks.com. That's DUBWERX.com.
This traffic report is supported by Unbound.org. Southbound 71 at Taft, broken down vehicle blocking the center lane. Northbound 75 approaching Mitchell. There's a wreck in the right lane. Westbound 74 between Harrison-Reibold and 275, a wreck on the shoulder. 5th and Elm Street downtown, there's a wreck. There's one on Plainfield south of Cooper. And northbound US 27 between East Miami River Road and Cleves Hamilton Road, there is a wreck. From 9, first warning weather. Clear skies tonight, a low of 61, turning cloudy, high of 86 tomorrow. It is 86 degrees now. This is 91.7 WVXU.
Support for NPR comes from this station and from the Lodestar Foundation, inspired by the principle that helping someone else less fortunate is a path to a happier, healthier, and more meaningful life. Learn more at lodestarfoundation.org. From the Kauffman Foundation, providing access to opportunities that help people achieve financial stability, upward mobility, and economic prosperity, regardless of race, gender, or geography. Kauffman.org. And from the sustaining members of this NPR station.
This is All Things Considered from NPR News. I'm Juana Summers.
And I'm Ari Shapiro. The Supreme Court heard a major case involving the structure of government today. A majority of the justices seemed inclined to uphold the way the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau and many other federal agencies are funded. NPR legal affairs correspondent Nina Totenberg reports.
Congress created the CFPB to protect consumers from what were seen as predatory and deceptive practices by financial institutions. Since then, the Bureau has established consumer protections for transactions ranging from mortgages to credit cards. But payday lenders have for years fought regulations that would limit excessive fees charged on small loans of just a few $100s. Fees that often end up costing people thousands of dollars. Then last year, the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals ruled that the CFPB structure is unconstitutional because instead of an annual congressional appropriation, Congress set the agency's funding at a capped amount that comes from banking fees paid to the Federal Reserve System. The government appealed to the Supreme Court because many other agencies are similarly funded, including the Federal Reserve itself, the FDIC, which insures bank deposits, the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, which charters and regulates all national banks, and potentially even Social Security and Medicare, which are funded by a specific tax. At the High Court today, Solicitor General Elizabeth Prelogar defended the CFPB's funding mechanism, noting that the Constitution's framers created similar funding structures.
The very first Congress appropriated without specifying a fixed sum. The first act that it enacted that was an appropriation specified up to a particular cap of spending that was authorized. That's just how the CFPB's funding mechanism is structured today, and there have been countless appropriations that look like this throughout history. We counted more than 400 uses of this kind of discretion.
But Chief Justice Roberts sounded skeptical.
You have a very aggressive view of Congress's authority in the appropriations process.
Justice Gorsuch asked whether the current rules would apply if the CFPB funds were not capped at $600 million, but $1 trillion. But Justice Kavanaugh interjected.
So Congress could change it tomorrow.
Absolutely, Congress could change it tomorrow.
Representing the payday lenders on the other side of the argument was former Solicitor General Noel Francisco.
Congress has never authorized an agency to pick its own perpetual appropriation. And if it can do that for the CFPB, then you have blessed a regime in which Congress can authorize the executive branch to spend whatever it wants to fund the entire government.
But several of the justices, both conservative and liberal, flatly told Francisco that his argument made no sense to them because it had no limiting principle. Justice Barrett.
Mr. Bishop, so what would the standard be? Is it like an intelligible principle of money spent? I mean, I think we're all struggling to figure out then what's the standard that you would use. It's just assuming that you're right, that there has to be something more than the $600 million.
How do you decide how much is too much?
It's difficult to come up with a hard and fast rule that's saying too much is too much.
Justice Kavanaugh questioned Francisco's argument that the CFPB is funded by a perpetual appropriation.
The word perpetual I'm having trouble with because it implies that it's entrenched and that a future Congress couldn't change it. But Congress could change it tomorrow. And there's nothing perpetual or permanent about this.
Francisco seemed to suggest that the problem with the CFPB funding is that it didn't go through an annual line-item congressional appropriation. But Justice Kagan pointed out that standing appropriations like this one were common at the founding.
Annual line-item appropriations were some appropriations, but massively not all appropriations. So you're just flying in the face of 250 years of history.
Justice Thomas also seemed frustrated.
I'd like you to complete this sentence. Funding of the CFPB violates the appropriations clause
because Congress has not determined the amount that this agency should be spending. Instead, it has delegated to the director the authority to pick his own appropriation, subject only to an upper limit that's so high it's rarely meaningful.
A decision in the case is expected next year. Nina Totenberg, NPR News, Washington.
After 148 days, television and movie writers are headed back to work. And whether they're starting a new job, working on a show that was put on hold, or looking for a new gig, writers are happy that the strike is over.
I'm really excited to go back to work. I love to write, and I love the room that I'm in. I'm really excited to kind of go back to that camaraderie and kind of that environment.
That's Elise Brown. She wrote on the Hulu series Candy, which is based on the true story of a woman accused of murdering her lover's wife.
I did have an affair with Alan Gore. But it has nothing to do with all of this. I ended it. I ended it a long time ago.
That's a scene from an episode Brown wrote, and on Wednesday, she's headed back to work, this time for season 3 of Showtime's hit series Yellow Jackets.
Another writer who can't wait to get back to work is Kylie Brakeman. She's a comedy writer, but isn't quite sure where she'll land.
I am unemployed in kind of an awesome and cool way, and it is kind of nice. Like, I know it is tough to find work as a writer and as an actor, but it feels a little bit more optimistic because it feels like there's more protections in place.
Brakeman had worked on The Tonight Show with Jimmy Fallon.
Thank you. Dogs willing to wear Halloween costumes. If you're looking at their owners and going, sure, I'll do it. It seems like they need this.
That's a joke Brakeman wrote for a recurrent bit, Thank You Notes. With all writing stopped, both Brakeman and Brown were left feeling, well...
I definitely felt a little aimless, a little wandering.
There was just so much kind of anxiety and emotion kind of built up in terms of just trying to figure out like where the strike was going and trying to continue to make ends meet, and also just worrying about, the uncertainty of it all.
So what do you do when you have all the time in the world? Pick up new hobbies, of course.
I picked up the banjo. We were on strike for long enough for me to buy a banjo, sort of learn how to play the banjo, and then completely forget how to play the banjo.
Luckily, banjo playing won't be necessary for her next job, but she does hope her next job will allow her to expand her comedic writing.
I think overall a big thing for me is I just love telling stories about women who are horrible, like Lucille Bluth.
That would be Lucille Bluth, the boozy matriarch from Fox's acclaimed series Arrested Development.
Get me a vodka rocks.
Mom, it's breakfast.
And a piece of toast.
Brown says she's looking forward to joining the staff of Yellow Jackets. She's especially drawn to how the series leans into dark comedy.
It's really bold and really surprising and unapologetic, and I think that makes it really fun and exciting, and so I'm excited to be back in the room and kind of be part of finding those things that hopefully people will find really surprising and exciting and don't see coming.
That was Elise Brown and Kylie Brakeman, members of the Writers Guild of America, who are no longer on strike.
is NPR News.
Pink popcorn and a life-size doll box are just some of what you could find at a movie theater in Moscow. Despite sanctions and regardless of geopolitics, Barbie has captured Russian hearts. How Barbie became Russia's somewhat unexpected summer surprise. Tomorrow on Morning Edition from 10 News.
Join Marianne Zelesnik tomorrow morning on 91.7 WVXU.
Support for WVXU comes from the Original Mattress Factory, offering factory-direct, locally made mattresses and box springs. Hand-built mattresses and box springs in Fairfield and selling them directly to their neighbors since 1992. For store locations and to learn more about their customer-first philosophy, visit originalmattress.com.
Southbound 71 at Taft, broken down vehicle in the center lane. Northbound 75 approaching Mitchell, a wreck in the right lane. Paddock near the lateral, there's a wreck there as well.
It's All Things Considered from NPR News. I'm Juana Summers.
And I'm Ari Shapiro. A new feature on the Lyft app will give non-binary and women riders priority to be matched with non-binary and women drivers.
Out of all the changes that they've made, I think this is one they should have made a long time ago. Because the technology is always there. It's just, priority.
Now the news.
Live from NPR News in Culver City, California, I'm Dwayne Brown. On Capitol Hill, infighting among Republicans has led to the ouster of House Speaker Kevin McCarthy, plunging Congress into further chaos just days after narrowly voted a government shutdown. The 216 to 210 vote marked the first time in history that the House has removed its leader, driven out by a small group of far-right Republicans. The rebellion was led by Florida Congressman Matt Gaetz, who accused the party leader of not doing enough to cut federal spending, among other things.
We've got to be able to assemble a governing coalition. We have to build from a place of trust. The reason Kevin McCarthy went down today is because nobody trusts Kevin McCarthy.
No clear successor has emerged to replace McCarthy. It's the latest drama in the year. I've seen the Republican-controlled House bring Washington to the brink of default and the edge of a partial government shutdown. Former UN Ambassador Nikki Haley appears to be gaining some momentum in her bid to become the Republican Party nominee for president next year. From New Hampshire Public Radio, Josh Rogers reports on the state's latest early voting poll.
With more than 50 New Hampshire campaign stops, Nikki Haley's become a familiar presence in the state that will hold the first primary. In her approach, conservative policies pitched without the hard edge of some of her Republican rivals appears to be working. That's according to several recent New Hampshire polls, putting her in second place, but Donald Trump still holds a commanding lead in those same polls. He also appears to be holding on to his core supporters. Neil Levesque leads St. Anselm College's Institute of Politics.
The issue is that Trump's supporters are not dropping off of Trump. So it's not like he's losing people to Nikki Haley, at least not yet.
Haley's New Hampshire gains appear to be coming at the expense of Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. For NPR News, I'm Josh Rogers in Concord.
Stocks finished broadly lower on Wall Street today. The Dow down 1.25%. This is NPR.
Good afternoon. It's 5:33 and 86 degrees in Cincinnati. This is 91.7 WVXU. I'm Bill Reinhardt. The school day in Ohio dawned with no real changes for students, teachers, or faculty, but Governor Mike DeWine says there's no Ohio Department of Education, even though 7 Democratic state school board members won a court order they say stops any changes. State House correspondent Karen Kassler has an update on the battle over a Republican-backed overhaul to K-12 education in the state.
DeWine told a conference of school administrators that funds will continue to go to schools through the new Department of Education and Workforce, but he'll follow the court order and not appoint anyone to lead it or transfer state school board powers to it.
That doesn't mean there's not a new department. That happened by rule of law last night.
Sky Perryman is with Democracy Forward, which is representing the elected state school board members and others who sued. For clarification of the court's order and to make their stance clear that if DeWine removes any power from the state school board, he should be held in contempt. Karen Kassler at the Ohio Public Radio State House News Bureau.
Official celebrations are planned for the next 2